feel like Frieren is starting to get boring. Hey, don't rush to argue, I'm not a hater. Today I just want to share personal thoughts about why I think Frieren's beauty is fading. It doesn't necessarily reflect everyone's views, so if you see things differently, feel free to drop a comment below. And if you are also interested in storytelling, this video will also show you which elements can make a story boring. One of Frieren's strengths is how it mixes memories and present-day scenes. But as the story progresses, especially in the more everyday plot, the author starts to lean heavily on memories, and memories seem to lose some of their earlier impact. And I think this is not because of the flashback itself, but because of the way memories are inserted has become assembly line. Whenever the main party goes on an adventure for some reason, we often get a flashback that shows Frieren has dealt with something similar before. This helps us get unfamiliar concepts. Using flashbacks as introduction is usually better than just throwing in explanations, as it weaves new elements into story and adds emotional warmth instead of cold, dry exposition. However, Frieren relies too much on memories to explain new things, turning them into a repetitive process. Plus, the way the author lays out these memories has drifted from the initial foreshadowing style. There are two examples of effective foreshadowing. At the beginning of the story, a ring is introduced without any explanation. Then, when Himo gives it to Frieren in episode 14, I finally grasp the emotional depth behind it. The church bells resonate similarly. During Himo's funeral, Frieren has a moment tied to the bells, and this detail comes back powerfully in episode 14, showing how skilled the author is using foreshadowing. These are good examples, but as the story goes on, it seems like the author starts customizing memories for every plot point. For instance, when Emperor Alcohol comes up, we get a sudden flashback to the hero party's history with it. When the Sacred Sword is involved, we see another flashback about their quest to get it. These memories feel more like last-minute explanations instead of sincere reflections that are deeply embedded in the character's experiences, like the ring and the bells. As this kind of scene builds up, memories shift from being emotional triggers to merely patches for world building. Plus, this approach can make it easier for viewers to see patterns in the story, stripping away surprises and making the narrative feel more formulaic, which cheapens those memories. But using past events to explain stuff isn't exactly rare, especially for a show that leans on memory like Frieren, so I think if we ignore them, it still looks okay. But what I did find a bit boring while watching were the characters. Yes, I'm talking about one of the most popular characters in the series, Himo. Himo was one of my favorite characters, and his moments with Frieren were really touching. But after the exam arc, Himo's appearances start to feel more mechanical. As I mentioned, memories about Himo become a way to explain new elements. Additionally, whenever Frieren's party faces challenges, a memory about Himo pops up at just the right moment, telling Frieren what to do and helping the main party navigate challenges. At first, these moments evoke a beautiful sense of transcending time and space. But after enough repetitions, it becomes easy to predict when Himo would show up, and each of his appearances starts to feel like a plot device. Because instead of needing to think critically, the main characters just pull out memories about Himo for guidance, leading them straight to solutions. And because of this, Himo turns into a machine for generating right answers. He's always kind, always perfect, and his narcissism shifts into something that makes him more likable. In more mature stories, characters like this lack complicity and come off as flat. The repetitive use of such characters can diminish the overall enjoyment. To illustrate how memories are treated differently, I'll compare Himo with characters from two other stories, This Is Us and Goodbye Eri. Spoilers for both works will follow. In This Is Us, even though the father Jack is gone, his teachings continue to inspire his children. People often tend to remember the good things about those who have passed while glossing over their flaws, mostly as a sign of respect and to make those memories feel more substantial. Yet, even his kind-hearted father has his shortcomings, like struggling with alcoholism and being self-abasement in his youth, which nearly ruined his relationship with Rebecca. In Goodbye Eri, the main character creates videos of his mother before her death. Every frame highlights her strength and kindness. But the reality is that, as she nears death, she also shows a lot of bad emotions. These characters, even though they are not as perfect as Himo, come across as more complex, reflecting human nature and making them feel more real. So how to address this issue? I think Goodbye Eri offers a solid solution. Memories are always filtered. The mother in those memories might seem as sweet as Himo, but the real mother has her own flaws. By the way, these are genuine human flaws, not just trivial narcissism. But the main character wants to remember her positively, so in the beginning, she comes across as overwhelming kind. If this storytelling approach were applied to Himmel, especially in the Goddess Monument arc where Himmel is not just in Frieren's memory, it could add a lot of depth to the character. And another small thing I want to mention is the repetitive storytelling. What makes Frieren stand out from other anime is its brilliant exploration of time, using elements like after stories and long-lived elves to express that theme, and then extending fable stories from there. But I personally think the problem is that while these fable stories are varied, the lessons they convey often overlap. This leads to repetitive plot lines or narrative styles. As a result, in later, more routine story arcs, I often see echoes of earlier parts. For example, in chapters 68 and 77, we see characters who value their hometowns, even when external pressures push them to leave. This reminds me of Sign's brother from the earlier parts of the story. In chapter 74, when faced with the powerful revolt, Stark purposely lets himself get injured to find revolt's weakness. This approach is very similar to his battles with Linnea. In the Golden Land arc, Denkin's refusal to go home closely resembles Sign's hesitation to start his journey, especially when Leonin mentions Denkin saying, "Our lifespans are limited. One day isn't the time that exists for us." It echoes Frieren's encouragement to Sign, "I'm talking about the story that unfolds for you now." Both highlight the importance of focusing on the present. Also in the Golden Land arc, Gluk dirtied his hands and killed others after his son's death, and Gnau, who lost his companion while protecting a child, grows indifferent to others' suffering. Their arcs, moving from grief to numbness, really feel similar. Even some specific details feel recycled, like the Sky Mountain Dragon and Blue Moon Weed. Flum leaves a ton of magic for the long-lived Frieren, just as Himmel leaves behind many statues for her. The repetitive storylines also lead to many similar phases. For instance, in my previous video, I mentioned that Frieren's plots are pretty straightforward, but this gives audiences more room to appreciate the underlying emotions and meanings. However, when similar plots get repeated over and over, even those simple narratives can lose their freshness. These are my personal impressions of Frieren. Compared to my last video, this evaluation is more subjective and doesn't necessarily reflect everyone's views. Also, while I've pointed out some criticisms of Frieren, that doesn't mean it's a completely flawed work. Certain story arcs and character developments are still highly valuable. I'll dig into that more in future videos.